Reporters Without Borders published its annual Press Freedom Index, where it found the Chinese Communist Party continues to be one of the world's most notorious persecutors of those who defend freedom of the press and freedom of information. RSF ranked the communist regime 177 out of 180 nations, with only Turkmenistan, North Korea and Eritrea faring worse. According to the index, the party threw 120 journalists in jail, holding them in conditions that RSF describes as posing a threat to their lives. The index aired concerns of the CCP's use of technology to install total control of speech and information in the country. By making extensive use of the latest technology, President Xi Jinping has succeeded in imposing a social model based on the control of news and information and the surveillance of citizens. An emphasis of concern in the report was CCP narrative control around the SARS-CoV-2 epidemic, which is likely to have originated from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, China's only biosecurity Level 4 laboratory. The government has also tightened its grip on social networks, censoring many keywords linked to coronavirus. The crackdown on foreign correspondence has been tightened, with 16 being expelled since the start of the year. The Cyberspace Administration of China, an agency personally supervised by Xi, has deployed a wide range of measures aimed at controlling the information accessible to China's 989 million internet users, said the organisation in a section dedicated to COVID-19 censorship and disinformation in the Asia-Pacific region. Thanks to its massive use of new technology and an army of censors and trolls, Beijing manages to monitor and control the flow of information, spy on and censor citizens online, and spread its propaganda on social media. The regime is also expanding its influence abroad, with the aim of imposing its narrative on international audiences and promoting its perverse equation of journalism with state. The report also found that authoritarian regimes, much like the US-based big tech cartel, were using the pandemic as an excuse to suppress disinformation, which basically includes any information that may contradict the centralized Communist Party narrative. Suppression of COVID-19 related information is something that was also observed in countries that were categorized with high ranking in the index. For instance, in Norway, which was awarded first place in the study, several reporters have complained that the state has blocked access to information about the pandemic. The index was calculated after taking into consideration mob violence unleashed on journalists as well as state repression. The Press Freedom Index, however, only mentioned a few instances of big tech's suppression of information and free speech. For instance, Facebook's attempted ban of Australian media after the federal government created legislation requiring large tech platforms to pay publishers for content was included in the report. However, it excludes mention of the ubiquitous suppression of the New York Post's Hunter Biden expose by the big tech cartel during the 2020 presidential election. RSF also praised Joe Biden for its accountability and transparency, even though his administration has been criticized for blocking reporters from visiting border areas amid the growing migrant crisis. The report also failed to detail disinformation repeatedly spread by legacy media outlets. Foreign reporters are facing intense pressure from the CCP, making it difficult for them to carry out their work. Over the past year, journalists working in the country have been threatened, harassed and expelled. In the first half of 2020, 18 journalists working for New York Times, The Wall Street Journal and The Washington Post were expelled. In September, reporters from Bloomberg, CNN, etc. were prevented from renewing their press credentials, according to a March 21st report released by International Press Institute. Australian journalist Cheng Li-ai, who used to work for state-run propaganda tool CGTN, was arrested in February this year. 2 other Australian media reporters fled the country to avoid persecution. John Sudworth, a BBC correspondent who has worked in China for 9 years, left the country along with his wife after threats intensified. Joseph Borrell, spokesperson for the EU foreign policy, condemned China's attack on journalists. The EU has repeatedly expressed its concerns to the Chinese authorities at the undue working restrictions imposed on foreign journalists and reported related harassment, said Borrell in a statement. Professionalism and objectivity of foreign correspondents is increasingly put into question. The EU stands up for the role of independent and reliable media all around the world. China should abide by its obligations under national and international law and ensure the freedom of speech and press. William Yang, a journalist who covers East Asian affairs, believes that China will tighten restrictions on foreign reporters even more in the coming years, adding that he believes press freedom and access for journalists to China will become collateral damage and that Beijing will use access to credentials against foreign media. Yang says reporting on sensitive issues will become increasingly difficult. The CCP is also cracking down on press freedoms in Macau and Hong Kong. One of Macau's largest broadcasters, Portuguese language media outlet TDM, has been asked to comply with CCP policies on media narratives after a recent meeting where staff were told that new editorial rules require them to promote so-called patriotism, respect and love for mainland China. At least 6 journalists resigned, according to Reuters. Macau's Portuguese media covered the 2019 Hong Kong protests extensively. Prior to the protests, Beijing praised Macau's media. After covering the events, organisations began being investigated by the Communist Party. People supporting Hong Kong, that was not allowed. There is a sensitivity about Hong Kong. For them, it was something big. How could they not cover it? Retrospectively, one could suspect that they went across the red line. They showed a bit too much independence. Eric Soted, a former Macau University professor, said to Reuters. In Hong Kong, Beijing is pushing more loyal bureaucrats into the ranks of the city's public broadcaster, RTHK. Accused of having an anti-government bias, the outlet's management is being filled with CCP supporters who have established red lines that reporters and writers are not allowed to cross. Many staff members are self-censoring themselves to prevent their programs from getting cancelled. One source told South China Morning Post that several employees were now living in white terror and completely avoid interviewing controversial pro-democracy figures. The broadcaster has been hit with a wave of program cancellations and resignations. The RTHK Program Staff Union said the new management team has frozen promotions and new hires. Instead, it is focusing on the creation of new positions which support the overhaul to broadcast CCP narrative. The Biden administration and the Chinese Communist Party came together to issue a joint statement on the urgency of tackling climate change, according to an AP article dated April 18. The move comes as Joe Biden is scheduled to host global leaders at a virtual summit centred on climate change. The statement was signed by China's Special Envoy for Climate Change, Xi Jinping, and US Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, John Kerry. The two administrations made statements promising they would be enhancing their respective actions and cooperating in multilateral processes, including the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Paris Agreement. Both Washington and Beijing agreed on 3 short-term actions to address the mainstream climate change narrative. Development of long-term strategies promising to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions, carbon neutrality by the time the UN Climate Change Conference is held at Glasgow in November. Boost international investment to support a transition away from traditional fossil fuel methods to methods coined as using renewable, green or low-carbon energy sources. and cut down production and consumption of hydrofluorocarbon as reflected in the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol. AP says the CCP is the biggest carbon emitter in the world, just behind the United States, both accounting for almost half of the world's fossil fuel emissions. Kerry pointed out that China is the biggest user of coal in the world and said that he has never shied away from expressing our views shared by many people that it is imperative to reduce coal everywhere. Kerry also said the two ruling parties have agreed on moving towards critical elements. However, Chinese Vice Foreign Minister Le Yucheng dismissed the possibility of committing to any new climate change pledges in the near future, arguing that given China's population of 1.4 billion people, achieving climate goals in a short time frame is something that is not very realistic. The Trump administration had pulled the United States out of the Paris Climate Agreement, arguing it was unfair to the American economy and workers, as well as myopic in how it would attain its stated goals. However, Biden officially rejoined the agreement in a landslide of actions on his first day in office. The United States, along with a host of other nations, are expected to announce their national targets for reducing carbon emissions at Biden's virtual summit. Meanwhile, Kerry was treated in a rather unprofessional way by the communist regime during his recent trip to China, which many believe reflects the increasingly authoritarian and dismissive manner in which Beijing views Washington. After arriving in China, the party did not send state officials to meet or accompany the US climate ambassador. Kerry was transported in a bus rented from a travel company, something which many people pointed out was rather humiliating. Prior to the visit, Republican Representative Michael McCall of Texas, lead on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, had warned Kerry against visiting China. Ambassador Kerry is sending the absolute wrong signal by planning to travel to the People's Republic of China to discuss climate issues, McCall said in a statement. The PRC is the world's largest carbon emitter and backer of coal power. Now reporting from Bloomberg is further revealing that forced labour and polluting industries are central to the PRC's superficial green energy plans. The United States should be working with countries that want to solve international problems, not those that are creating or worsening them, he said, also cautioning Kerry against negotiating with the communist regime on climate change. McCall pointed out that there are clear ties between China's use of forced labour of Uyghur Muslims and the polysilicon supply chains in the Xinjiang Autonomous Region. He asked the Commerce Department to blacklist state-run entities responsible and allow Customs and Border Protection to issue seizure orders for products imported from Xinjiang. In a recent interview with the Wall Street Journal, Kerry promised to hold China accountable for its climate pledges, but shied away from mentioning anything about forced labour. Some experts have expressed worries that by attempting to cooperate with China on climate change, the United States would cede grounds in other more critical areas like human rights, national security and trade. Democrats recently reintroduced their Green New Deal in the form of a Senate resolution which some GOP members have criticised to be a socialist super package. First introduced back in 2019, the Green New Deal claims its goal is to eliminate America's greenhouse gas emissions in just a decade through a transitioning away from traditional fossil fuel consumption while incorporating drastic climate change measures. Senator Ed Markey, Democratic representative of Massachusetts, lauded the Green New Deal as a revolution, claiming it will enable Americans to transform their economy and democracy by addressing climate change. Republican Representative Ralph Norman of South Carolina, Environment Subcommittee ranking member, however, dismissed the Green New Deal as overt socialism. True to its name, the Green New Deal is the most amateurish resolution in recent memory, he said in a statement. This legislation will change every aspect of American life, what we eat, how we travel, how we stay warm, and even what jobs we can take. This is no way to govern. Simply put, the Green New Deal is an attempt to disguise socialism in the name of environmental protections. It isn't just Republicans opposing the Green New Deal. Even moderate Democrats are dismissive of the proposal. Senator Joe Manchin, Democratic representative of West Virginia, who had opposed the proposal in 2019, stated recently that the deal is not practical. He warned that the citizens cannot eliminate their way to a cleaner environment. Instead, you have to innovate your way.